This week on the Context blog, we are thrilled to welcome a former Context editor, Arlene Stein. Arlene is professor of sociology at Rutgers University, and she studies the intersections of gender, sexuality, culture, and politics. She's the author or editor of 9 books, the most recent of which is titled Unbound, Transgender Men, and the Remaking of Identity. And this is the book that has brought Arlene here to the blog today. Arlene recently wrote a piece about her experience as the target of a book ban, and we thought we'd invite her up to the blog to share more about this experience in an interview. So Arlene, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about the experience that inspired your post?
Sure. So I was driving home from vacation in Cape Cod. I was away for a few weeks, and I got on my phone, I got a message. Your book is being challenged in a town or small city in Texas called League City. It was a message from local activists who thought that I should be apprised of this fact. And my book was among, I believe it was 3 or 4 books that were being challenged. All of these books dealt with LGBTQ themes. My book, as far as I can tell, was the only book that was actually sort of more of an academic book, although as I'll explain, it's not sort of traditionally an academic book at all. The other books were focused on or the target audiences were younger people, so kids, teenagers, mainly teenagers and young adults. So what happened was during Pride Month this past summer, my book was displayed in the public library of this city near Galveston. And it caught the eye of somebody in town who was on a committee that had begun to decide which books were appropriate for kids and young adults in the public library to be exposed to. It was a controversial committee. It was called the Community Standards Committee. And they decided to pick on my book and a few others, in part because I think they saw it in passing, and it had transgender in the title, and it had a picture of several transgender men on the cover. They hadn't read the book, but they thought that it was, or they assumed it was inappropriate for young people to be exposed to.
So what is the book about?
Unbound is what I would call a work of public sociology or popular sociology. I am a sociologist of gender and sexuality. I've spent many years studying LGBTQ lives in particular, but also have other interests. But it's a book that is, a kind of a popular approach to what we might call the social construction of transgender lives. So, the idea for the book began many years ago. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I heard about more and more individuals who were choosing to modify their bodies, who were female assigned at birth, who decided that they wanted to, in particular, to masculinize their chests, usually as part of a gender transition, to embrace masculinity. And I thought, I didn't quite know what to think of this. I was of the feminist generation that, it was all about women power. And I couldn't quite get my head around the fact that individuals would choose to, embrace their inner masculinity. And I was teaching courses on gender and sexuality and LGBT studies and other things. And I thought, I don't really know that much about this population. I need to start talking to people, because that's sort of my first impulse. Well, my first impulse is to read about things. My second impulse is to talk to people. And what I found was there was really very little out there about the experiences of transgender men. Most of what we knew at the time was about transgender women. And I decided to, the other thing going on is I kept hearing about a surgeon in Florida who had become, very well known for his what he called female masculinization procedures. So basically chest masculinization. And I decided to try to make contact with somebody that was about to undergo that procedure, to interview them. And my thought was that in the process of doing that, I would actually go to Florida, go to the surgical setting, and I would interview other people who were having surgery the same day. I wanted to know who was there, what the scene was like, why people, had made this, very important decision for themselves, and what was motivating it. And I did that, and I tried to interview that. There were 5 people who were undergoing surgery on one particular day, and I interviewed 4 of them, not on the day that they were undergoing surgery, but made plans to talk with them afterwards. The book is the story of those 4 individuals, and who they are, what it meant to them to modify their bodies, and how the process of gender transition shaped their lives for the next year or year and a half.
Yeah. I want to follow up on a line that you wrote in your blog post. So you say that people advocating to ban books often claim that the very act of publicly discussing LGBTQ issues threatens families by undermining the ties between parents and their children. And then you write that in your experience, the very opposite seems to be true. Can you tell us more about what you mean by this and what you've observed?
Yeah, the right wing, or a certain sector of the right wing that is very involved in these book bans, says that exposure to certain ideas is dangerous. Among those ideas is the fact that there are multiple ways of living in your body, expressing your desires, and that there are ways of creating a life that is, happy and fulfilling, even if you don't fit into the, shall we say, the binaries of various sorts. So they would say that being exposed to that understanding is in itself dangerous, especially dangerous to young people, because they don't have any. They would say they don't have filters, they don't have people guiding them, they're very impressionable. Contrary to that claim, it's parents of people who are undergoing gender transitions who at first are very uncomfortable with the idea that their kid is making choices that they might not understand, but then over time comes to understand why those choices are important to them. Those are the people who have told me that my book has been really useful to them. So, so for example, in the book, one of the people I focus on is a guy named Ben, and his parents are actually there at the surgery center with him. And I get to know them during the course of this project, and get to know them really well, and a kind of, as they undergo this kind of intimate, sort of process with their kid. And, as I was writing, I kind of had them in my head that how could I explain what was going on as a sociologist who's not herself trans, in a way, and how could I translate some of the ideas that, smart people write about, in relation to such issues? How could I translate it to them? And they told me that it was really, really important for them to read this book, and that because of the book, they were able to maintain, uh, a sense of respect, and they were able to understand their kid a lot better. So, the fact, I mean, that was really flattering, and, it's about as much as one can hope for.
Yeah.
So the right claims that, uh, books like mine actually threaten the relationships between parents and kids. And I would say that the opposite is the case. It allows parents to actually understand their kids better, because a lot of the people that I'm writing about in this book are actually, or almost all, they're all in their 20s.
Yeah, thank you. Next question is, what motivated you to write about this experience for context?
Well, it was a little bit shocking to me that my book was challenged. I hadn't anticipated it. I had heard about book bans, of course, and I thought, well, it doesn't really concern me. I'm a sociologist, an academic. I'm not writing for kids. I'm not even writing for young adults.
Yeah.
And the process of having my book challenged made me realize that it's much bigger a problem than I had anticipated in the past. The right is really going after knowledge of all sorts. The focus is on uh, the knowledge that kids might have access to, but it's much bigger than that. Well, for one thing, kids can pick up all sorts of books, and there should be some guardrail so that kids don't have access to just about anything. But yet, you know, my book is a case of a book that was published by a mainstream press. It's, what we might call a trade book. So it got broad circulation. It's not just written for an academic audience. It's unclear, it's like there's no way of really controlling whose hands whose hands it might fall into. But it's also, you know, uh, I believe an eminently reasonable book that
Yeah.
is actually, not inflammatory in the least, and is, a very, sort of sober and, careful assessment of the experience of trans men. So it kind of shocked me that even a book like mine was suspect, and that made me realize that we're all, vulnerable in some way,
Yeah.
because our books could be challenged, but we could be living in communities where uh, books of the sort that we think should be out there can be challenged.
Yeah. Overall, how do you feel that this experience has affected you, whether personally or professionally?
Uh, well, I think in some ways it exposed me to the risks of writing for the quote unquote general public. You're not quite sure where your book is going to travel if you do that. If you're writing for an academic audience, you have a much better idea of who the audience is, and you could expect the response to your book to be, kind of measured, and, sort of, there are certain conventions for, arguing with and against books in the academic arena. Um, but if you publish a book that kind of, sort of uh, has a broader audience in mind, uh, you're possibly, especially in the current environment, placing yourself in a more vulnerable position. So I think I'm more aware of that, and I think that it makes me believe that we need to stick together as scholars and as writers, and we need to support one another, and our institutions need to support one another better than they do now. Um, but at the same time, it kind of reinforced my belief that it's really important to
Mhm.
translate our work and allow it to go in places that we may not anticipate that it travels to. It was, my first response when I heard that this book was challenged was, I broke out into tears, which really surprised me because all these friends of mine were saying, "Oh, you've arrived! How great! This is a badge of honor." Uh, but all I could think of was how awful it is that a sort of more powerful right wing in this country
Yeah.
is attacking knowledge. Um, and yet, the experience has also made me much more vehement about the importance of doing work that we think is important, not
Mhm.
compromising our values, and not hiding, our ideas behind jargon and behind, sort of obscurity if we can help it.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Arlene, for your important research and for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you. This was
Take
fun.
care.
You too.